So welcome back to week 4 of 6. So we will go through April 30th and a few more Thursdays. And I don't know about you guys, but today's I was like, this is a perfect day to talk about the dark night of the soul, because the stay-at-home time frame just got extended, and I've already picked up a heavy boulder this morning, and I've already had to put something on the altar this morning. And so I'm putting this stuff into practice. But as I was talking with clients this week, I think a lot of us are just in this time of really struggling with motivation, really struggling with uncertainty. So I want you to know you're not alone. You know, I'm talking with a lot of people through the course of the week, and we are really all in this together emotionally, and it is hard. And so it's not that something's wrong with you or that you're not doing something right. There is no right way to do this. So when, you know, for my own, the boulder I picked up this morning was that I had just invested in this new workshop space to have people come and do these kind of classes, and it's sitting there empty now, and I shouldn't have done that, and had I known, and all of this stuff, right? And my husband came in the middle of me picking up this very heavy boulder of worry and said, why don't you show yourself some self-compassion? Which is exactly what I teach. But I don't, so I just want to tell you, I teach this all day long, and I'm still struggling, and I still have to remind myself that this is hard stuff. We have never been in this territory before, and so we have to honor that it's hard. And that's what we're going to talk about today is what we do with that feeling, that awful, awful feeling that we've spent the first few weeks kind of trying to prepare our hearts and minds. And now today we're going to go into what John of the Cross calls the dark night of the soul, and talk about what that means a little bit. But to review last week, I hope you experimented with Lectio Divina, which is the multiple times of reading scripture. And as Michelle said earlier, she did the practice of reading the last few chapters of the 4 Gospels, where we get the crucifixion and resurrection story. And that's so powerful to put those all together and read those as a group. I hope you experimented with putting your name into scripture, that the scripture was speaking to you. That's a beautiful practice. If you didn't get a chance to do those things this week, the handouts will guide you through that. But those are all things that, you know, I know we all think, oh, that's a good idea, I should do that. But then we actually have to do it to feel the effect of it. So I just want to keep reminding you and encouraging you. We read for this week the Psalm 139. And if you will, in the chat, maybe put a line or what in that psalm really spoke to you. I'll give you a little refresher that the psalm covers that it's safe to surrender, basically, is kind of what I get out of that psalm, that the God that made me knows my thoughts. He already knows what I'm thinking and feeling before I have to say anything in prayer. He's with me everywhere I go, knit me together in my mother's womb. That imagery is really beautiful. And then when I lose my way, he's there waiting for me to return, right? That's what Psalm 139 kind of offers us. So maybe highlight what you get out of that psalm. And in case you haven't read it yet, you can see those chat lines, and that may tempt you to go into that psalm. But as a quick contexting piece, the Psalms are 150 poems. And to me, the Psalms really summarize what it means to be human, the struggles we have in our humanity, and how to relate, the struggles of relating to God in our human lives. I call the Psalms a permission slip to scream at God, to feel whatever you're feeling, to get angry, to doubt, to question, to want revenge. I mean, some of those Psalms get ugly with like human language of what we feel deep, deep, deep. And so the Psalms give us a permission slip to go to God with all of that. Just cry it out, scream it out, show the anger. I think that's why they were included in the Bible is it's permission to get mad at God. And people of all faiths refer to the Psalms, which I think is so interesting. It is a really universal scripture that many faiths, we share with many faiths. So I think the important thing there is to stay in the conversation with God. We all know in our marriages and relationships, when we stop talking, that's when there's really a problem, right? When we stop the communication is when we know, ooh, this is bad. And so I feel like God just wants us in the conversation. Just don't stop talking to me, even if you're angry and struggling right now. And this is a hard human experience you're having right now. Cry it out to me, groan it out to me, scream it out to me, share your doubts, yell at me for not doing anything. That's what the psalmists are really saying is, God, where are you? I call out to you. I've done everything right and you're not showing up. So it is full on permission to have all the feelings you're feeling. So this week, you're going to read an excerpt from Lamentations, which is another heavy read. We often don't hear Lamentations preached on or taught on very much because it's pretty much just 5 poems of despair. And so the Lamentations was written possibly by Jeremiah the prophet, possibly by somebody that was living in Jerusalem and saw the ruin of the city after the Babylonians came in and took over. And this happened 586 BC. So before the life of Jesus, 586 years before. And this was back in those age-old, really tough battles with the Babylonians and in Israel, and a lot of that very ugly history. But Jeremiah the prophet had warned people, if you don't get your act together and return to God, ruin is coming your way. And he had threatened that Jerusalem could be ruined in his prophecy. And so that's why he gets attached to Lamentations often. But there's also scholars that think it was just somebody watching all the despair. So when I went back to think about scriptures for this week, I read it and it starts with the city is still and there's no movement. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is kind of what we're in, right? We're not in destruction of physical buildings like Jerusalem was, but we are in a bit of despair over everything has changed. And so I invite you to read that poem. It's one of the 5 that you're going to be reading. It's number 3. And what it does is also say, God is with you in the despair. God is with you in the ruin. And there will be another day. There will be a rebirth, which is the resurrection, that story that we as Christians hold on to. So and that's your reading for this week. And I think that you might even go into your own fear a little bit and see if you're having some of the same feelings that the lamenter is feeling. The person that wrote Lamentations is saying, why did you let this happen, God? Where were you? You could have stopped this. You could have protected us. You could have intervened. You could have saved that person. And so go into your own kind of despair with that of are you having some of these same feelings? And if so, then like the psalmist, cry them out to God, write a letter to God, process that. And that's what we're going to talk about today too, as we go. Because what this lamenter in scripture is feeling is grief. Grief that the city has been destroyed. Grief that what was prophesied came true. Grief that we didn't listen. Grief that everything as I know it is gone. Grief that I'm doubting God now, right? That is all mixed into this heavy poetry. And I think we're all kind of in our own way, maybe afraid to admit some of these thoughts, but we're having some of these thoughts of if God is sovereign and if God can heal, why aren't prayers being answered? Or where is God in all of this? And we know as people of faith, that is not how God works. God does not make horrible things happen, and God does not answer our prayers, right? I mean, we know that intellectually, but I think we're also all struggling to make sense of a lot of things and make sense of how our faith holds up when things get really, really tough. And that's kind of where we're headed today. But this topic of grief, I want to spend a little time on. There was an article circulating around social media from the Harvard Business Review, and I'll post it on our class webpage. But the title of the article was, "The discomfort you're feeling is grief." And I've seen it a few times, and then Deanne Sheets said this would be great for the class. And so I read it again with you in mind, and it's perfect. And so I wanted to include it in our talk today. And I will say David Kessler is the person that's interviewed in the HBR article. And David Kessler founded grief.com, which is a website with a lot of grief resources. So I want to give that to you as a resource too. David Kessler is the person that came up with the 5 stages of grief, he and his co-writers, his partners. But there is a lot of good information on grief.com. So in this article, he offers that COVID, this pandemic, has triggered a collective grief in our world. And in our nation, I think we're all feeling that, right? We've lost our freedom. We've lost the lives as we know it. We've lost our activities, our graduations, our plans. As Kim was saying earlier, Mother's Day, people can't be with their mothers in nursing homes, graduations, weddings, funerals, jobs, money, the economic loss, the loss of connection with one another. So we are in grief. It doesn't take much to make a case for that. And then David also offers, not only are we grieving the losses, but we are grieving what is to come. And he calls that anticipatory grief. So there's still a threat looming out there, and our imaginations are still going into worst case. What if I get it? What if somebody I love gets it? Even the language, I've noticed tuning into all of this week on a different level to prepare for class, I've noticed this language of the peak will be April 19th in Kansas City. That is anticipatory grief right there, right? We're already saying, oh my gosh, it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's anticipatory grief. So we're kind of swimming in a pool of language and threat that causes us to grieve before we even have the loss, right? We're already feeling the loss that we fear is coming. So Kessler, in his 5 stages of grief, if you haven't read his stuff, I'll give you a quick review or quick summary. So if we apply the 5 stages of grief to the pandemic, to the virus right now, here's what it would look like. So the denial phase is the first phase. That was when maybe we were all saying, oh, that's happening in China. But lots of things happen in China that don't come to North America. So I'm sorry that it's happening there, but I think we're good here. Okay, that was our denial phase. And then we went into anger, which was, you can't cancel all of our plans. You can't do this. You can't cancel the Big 12. You can't cancel the NCAA. You can't cancel school. No, you can't. It's my senior year. Like, no, right? We went through that. We lost control. And when you lose control, you get angry. And so that's a very normal human experience. But David Kessler puts that in the 2nd stage of grief. You're mad that this is happening. Then his 3rd stage is bargaining. And bargaining for us looked like, okay, I could do this for 2 weeks. All right, I'll stock up on groceries. We can do this. We'll make a schedule for how our day's gonna look. We can do this. And then we'll be back to normal in a couple weeks, right? So that was our bargaining. I'll make a deal with you. I'll give you 2 weeks, but then I wanna come back to normal. And when I have studied the Psalms deeply, and some of you have been in the class I did on the Psalms, and I think we're going to do a reboot of that class after this pandemic. But the Psalms, there's a lot of bargaining. So like somebody will say, hey, God, if you save me from this mess, I'll tell the world about you, right? If you save me from death, I'll give my life to you. And so we make these deals, and we all do it. And I didn't realize I was doing it until I read the Psalms and really studied it. And I was like, oh, yep, we do that. So we're always making deals, right? I'll do this if I get my life back. And so just notice when you're kind of in that bargaining stage. We've all been there. And then sadness hits. And I feel like a lot of us are sort of in this stage, maybe, or have been recently, of everything has stopped. And this is sad. I wasn't with my family on Easter. I can't be with people I love. My old life is gone. I can't gather with the people that help me get through life. And I don't have any freedom. And that is sad. That's sad to take that away from people. And so we just sit in that of, that's what I'm feeling. I'm not as angry as I am sad. And then acceptance is his fifth stage. And I see this happening in some of us too, is acceptance looks like, this happened and this is happening and I am in it and this is our new normal. And we start to accept, okay, I did learn how to get groceries a new way. I do know what's essential and what's not now in my life. I can wash my hands. I can wear a mask. I can work from home. All right, this is normal. And we just kind of accept that this is where we are. And then recently, David Kessler came out with another book, and he added a sixth stage. And that stage is meaning, finding meaning in the grief. And I see some of us in this too, of, okay, I can see the good that's coming out of this. I'm going on family bike rides, and I'm having dinner every night with my kids, and we're having great conversations, and I can be out in nature and truly thank God it's spring, because that's a lifeline for all of us, is to see spring coming. And so we start to appreciate the good that could come out of this, or is coming out of this. And maybe we see that, oh, wait, I don't want to go back to that old life. I thought that was everything, but maybe there's something to learn from this. So that's meaning in grief. So it's still that we don't like that it has happened. We're still grieving the loss, but our brain just starts to accept it and work with it and find the good in it. And so I think for us today, part of our work, and psychologists will all affirm this, is to name the feeling, really name the feeling. And tools like Kessler's grief stages help us articulate what we're feeling, but we can't always find words for. And so of people of faith, when we are uncertain and lost and sad, we turn to God. And also, as people of faith, we get frustrated when what we thought was the deal, if I'm a good Christian person, if I do all the right things, bad things won't happen to me, right? Somewhere we got that in our heads, that righteousness is always rewarded. And there's scripture to support that. But then when your loved one passes away, and when you are deeply personally affected, when your job is lost, when your money is very uncertain, then we begin to say, wait, I thought that's how God worked, but why is this horrible thing happening to me right now? And so that's where we are kind of this week in our study, is we're sitting in that opportunity to grow closer to God in this dark night of the soul, or drift away from God in the dark night of the soul. And so that's where we are this week as we come into this new layer of studying the mystics. So I think what I want to look at is kind of where we've been. So remember, contemplation was our first practice of centering prayer to really trying to tune into the presence of God. And then we realized our minds race, and it's very hard to be without thoughts, and it's very hard to not worry. So we started practicing some tools of what do we do with those thoughts so that we can be quiet and go to God. And then we talked about the levels of awareness and tuning into a spiritual awareness of, oh, I notice God. I notice God a whole lot more. And you had a worksheet, I think in week 2, of noticing God in your week. And I hope you'll print that worksheet every week and continue that practice. All of these practices I introduced to you, but I expect, whoops, I just spilled water. I expect that we keep doing it, okay? So keep that worksheet going, keep noticing God, because that's how we build that muscle of awareness. And then we worked on opening our hearts and minds and trying to expand, that heart breathing from a place of your heart, right? We're trying to kind of embody this idea that the mystics have of God is not just an intellectual study. God is a heartfelt experience. And so we've incorporated some of these embodiment experiences so that we start to get comfortable with this idea that God lives within us. God lives within us. And that takes a while, I think, to get kind of acceptance of that and worthiness of that. So then we came to Good Friday, and that was just coincidence in the study that I was, well, not kind of coincidence, kind of by design, but I was talking about surrender and then looking at Good Friday as Jesus, Jesus surrendered on the cross, but that does not mean give up. That means he rose to God. So when we surrender, that does not mean we lay down and take it. That means we call God in and we rise to God, and we use this as an experience to grow closer to God and let God take it. I'm not driving this car anymore, God. You take it. You go. I'm following. Right? That's what surrender means to us. So then Easter, we celebrated the resurrection, which is the guiding theme for us as Christians, that there is always a new beginning, that the end is actually the beginning of something new. And so today we're going to make that same shift in our study. Today we're going to look at grief and despair and how that moves us towards God for something new in our spiritual journey. And then next week, we're going to look at how we see God in everything. And you're going to read St. Francis of Assisi and Bernard of Clairvaux, which are two of usually a crowd favorite. You've done the hard ones. Now we move into the easy ones. And they write about God in nature everywhere. And you're going to love those readings. And then the last week, April 30th, we're going to look at how do you and I try to incorporate all of this stuff that the mystics have offered to us and all of these practices, and how do we lead a contemplative life in the reality of 2020. And then we'll conclude the study on the 30th. And then I have all kinds of dreams of regathering to talk deeper about some of these mystics, because this is just an introduction. So if this is resonating with you and you like this stuff, there will be more. So this week, you're going to read from John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila. And I'll give you a little background on that. But this phrase I'm using, dark night of the soul, and that actually originated with John of the Cross. He first kind of coined that term. And we hear that term a lot today, kind of tossed around, and it has different meanings to all of us. Some people think of the dark night of the soul as that moment when you're on your knees, hopeless, rock bottom, surrender to God. I've got nothing else. You have to rescue me and lead me out of this misery. And some people see it as the dark night of the soul is dark because you go away from God, that in your despair and in your feeling of forsakenness, you walk away. And the doubt was too much. And so none of it could be real. And you use that as proof that God doesn't exist instead of proof that God does exist. And so I think that the cross, to me, as I reread some of these mystics, the crucifixion of Jesus became proof that God does exist, rather than the people at the base of the cross watching it were starting to wonder if God did exist, right? Because if you're the Messiah, you can get yourself down. Remember that quote as witnesses were saying? And so I can see where that pivot is such a fine line of I could go away from God or I could go to God. And so that's really what John of the Cross is kind of writing about. When he says dark night of the soul, he actually sees it as a good thing, because what he's writing about is when you're in despair and feeling forsaken, it's a chance to go deeper with God than you've ever gone before. And so dark night of the soul in its original meaning was, this is a gift. This is a gift. I will look back on this someday and see it as a gift, as hard as it is to see it right now. But you see that opportunity to go closer to God. And I think that we're all in that a little bit right now. I think that this has rocked our worlds, literally, and figuratively, and nothing is the same. And so we kind of have a choice of how we come out of this. And I think by all getting on these calls and doing this homework and working at it, is we're saying, I want to grow closer to God through this. So we will keep practicing that. Okay, so I want you to think now about a faith you can count on, right? So I didn't want to steal Adam Hamilton's thunder last week by bringing this up. But to me, what we're talking about with moving from an intellectual understanding of God into a heart experience with God is creating a faith you can count on. So what Adam Hamilton, our senior pastor, every Easter, he ends his sermon with this story of somebody questioning him saying, hey, you're a smart guy. Do you really believe in this resurrection thing? And he says, not only do I believe it, I'm counting on it. And that's what I want us each to have of our own. A faith you can count on, not Adam Hamilton's faith that he can count on, but the faith that you personally can count on. And that's where I think, that's where I am so passionate when I teach about this stuff, because I think that we have a lot of tools and a lot of teachers, a lot of resources to develop a faith we can count on ourselves. We just have to kind of allow ourselves to do the work and allow ourselves to put it to the test, our own test, and allow ourselves to really believe I can count on that and trust it. So that's kind of where we're headed today. And I think I started coming to Resurrection my late college years when it opened in the Wesley Chapel. And so I've listened to Adam Hamilton many, many, many times. And when he would say a phrase like that, like a faith you could count on, I would sit there and think, I'm glad he has that, but do I have that? I don't know. What is that? And I had a big question mark on like, what is a faith you can count on? And I think that in hindsight, I really had a deep desire to figure that out. I couldn't see at the time it would lead me to seminary, but I think at age 40, when I enrolled in seminary, that's probably what I was really searching for. If I could have articulated it, was I really want to have faith that I can count on. And I will tell you, some of you have heard me say this about the 2-year mark in seminary. So seminary is a 4-year master's program in theology and divinity. And about the 2-year mark, I almost quit because I was so disgusted with organized religion. And I was studying church history, and I was just like, I don't want to be part of this. This is awful what we've done to people in the name of God. And we are strayed so far from the teachings of Jesus. And I was studying the popes and what every pope had done in history. And I was like, oh my gosh, we have missed the point. And so I was about to give up. And then I found some of the readings you're reading. And I got to that point in history where I was like, oh, wait a minute. These people sound a little more like what Jesus was teaching. All right, I'm going to hang on, I'm not giving up yet. And then I started to think, okay, we can have this personal relationship with God that you can count on personally. That's what the mystics were trying to convey to us. And some of it's in medieval language that's really dense and hard to read. But the point is, and if you don't read any of it, this will give you enough to trust it. The point is that you personally have a relationship with God that is yours, and a faith of your own, and a faith you can count on. So that's why I think that this stuff is so timely, and why it's resonating with all of us right now is that we are in such a unique time of testing everything, testing our faith, testing our lifestyle, testing our values, testing our schedule, what was important, what's not, testing our relationships. People are stuck at home with spouses they're not sure they want to be married to. Kids are stuck at home with parents they were really hoping to get away from, And so I think that we are really putting to the test a lot of stuff inside ourselves. And so this is an example of when an intellectual faith doesn't help you when the wheels come off the cart. right? It has to be a deeper faith, because when you are locked down with people, when the diagnosis comes, when the car accident occurs, when the child dies, when the divorce papers are served, when this hard stuff in life hits you, you have to have a faith of your own to sustain you through that. And I think that that's where we get into existential crisis and faith crisis, is when we haven't done the work that you're all doing to try to really make this your own. So the resources I give you in every class, and you know this if you've taken classes with me, I give you a ton of stuff because I just want to be a curator for you, right? It's like a museum. Like, I'm going to pull all the things of this general theme that helped me, and I'm going to give them to you. And then I hope you just find a nugget somewhere and you develop from there. So my faith is not what I want for you. I want you to have a faith. And I want all of these things to speak to you in the way God would have them speak to you. So all of these tools are for you and God to form a partnership and your own way of thinking, and a very individual approach to faith. So there's no right or wrong way to do this, and there's no person that has it figured out more than somebody else. We are all on this path and this destination to union with God, as the mystics would call it. And the thing that intrigues me with the mystics is many of them are very ill. Many of them, they're in prison. John of the Cross writes from prison. You're going to read that this week. But Teresa of Avila, Julian of Norwich, they had kind of near-death experiences when they really embraced God. And then and some of you have had those too. You've been near death where you understood God completely differently than before that experience. And so that's what, when you're alone in a dark room, God is all you have. And that's what I want for you, is that moment when you're alone in the dark, you have God right beside you. And so that's kind of the goal in all of this work that we're doing. So on the class webpage, you're going to see a link to a chapter from Barbara Brown Taylor's book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. This is a beautiful book. It's one that I have marked up, dog-eared, highlighted. I go back to it often. I'm going to share a chapter of her book with you. And it is, it's the chapter of just awareness of how comfortable are you in the dark. And it's so interesting. She tells this story of, she's living on a farm and her niece comes to visit, and her niece is a city girl. And she says, let's go out to the chicken house at night and collect the chickens, because that's when the chickens are quiet and you can get the eggs easily. And so the niece is petrified of the dark. She's not used to being out in the country with no lights on. And so Barbara Brown Taylor, who's an awesome teacher and preacher, you can find her sermons on YouTube. A lot of her sermons on YouTube are just amazing. But she's an Episcopal priest. She has this chapter that I'm going to give to you on how comfortable are you in the dark. You know, and it's made me realize I turn the lights on a lot and I get a little nervous when I can't see. And that to me is a spiritual metaphor, right? And so explore your own awareness of the dark and how comfortable are you with it, and learn to sit in the dark and it's all okay a little bit more. Learn to get comfortable with not knowing what's coming next. Those are very spiritual metaphors that I hope you'll kind of seep yourself in when you read. And her reading is easy compared to Augustine. It's a piece of cake. So she's easy to read. So if you read nothing else, read that chapter this week. But then really apply that as a spiritual metaphor in your life. Let her imagery of darkness really speak to you. And then I think that leads to a question of, what's my imagery of God? And that's what I want to talk about next with you. So when you close your eyes and pray, are you crawling into the lap of somebody that loves you unconditionally and just can't wait to spend time with you? Or are you standing at the base of a throne with a judging God with a staff and a scorecard, you know, and kind of play with, what's my imagery of God? Because if in the dark, it's scary to go to somebody that's judging you, right? In the dark, it's scary to go to somebody who's judging you. And so maybe part of your prayer life is hampered or challenged because of who you're going to in the dark. And so I just want you to explore this on your own. But imagery of God is really important to me. And I think that some of you were in the class Be Still and Know. And we talked about this, gosh, a couple of years ago now. But I remember one day we had a whole 2 hours talk on this imagery of God, and it was fabulous. And if we were going to be together, I would totally do this again. We'll do it. But I remember Amelia Ryan and Sandy Trotter both had horrific hospital experiences, and they were sharing the same imagery in our class, and we all resonated with it. And it was like God being that warm blanket wrapped around you that you get in the hospital. Oh, and I think most of us were in tears, and Sandy and Amelia just kept describing it in more beautiful language than I can today. But to them, and I still remember that as I was writing this last night, I was like, oh my gosh, I still remember that moment in that room. We were in the foundry, and all of us were so touched by this imagery these two women both had of God being this warm blanket in the hospital. And so that's the kind of creative imagery I want you to explore a little bit more of what is God to you. Because then when you're in the dark and you're going to God, there's nothing scary about going to the image of a warm blanket wrapped around you in the hospital, right? That's beautiful. You'll talk to God a whole lot more if that's the imagery that you hold on to of God. And so I want to invite you to let it evolve a little bit, so that the imagery you had in your childhood might not work for you today in adulthood. And I will say my imagery has evolved a lot over the years. I mean, I think as a child, I somewhere got the picture that God was on a throne as kind of an all-knowing, knew all the stuff I did wrong, knew all the mess ups, and that when I went to God in prayer, it was a little bit like I was asking forgiveness and scared. And maybe there was this big book that had my name written at the top of it and all the things I'd ever done wrong, right? That's what God was. So of course I didn't go talk to God very often because I felt like I was being judged or scorekeeping. And then when I was super sick with multiple sclerosis for a period of time and couldn't walk. And in that time, my imagery, I needed God, but that God didn't help me, right? That I didn't want to ask for help from the God that was reminding me of everything I'd ever done wrong. And so my imagery changed, not by design or intentionally. I just needed a new image of God, and God kind of became a rescuer for me. And I remember one time, really sick, having this, I was praying or laying quietly, and I remember this like rescue helicopter imagery, and God lowering, I'm drowning in the ocean, and God lowering a lifeline, like a raft that I could climb on and cling on and hang on to. And that imagery made me feel like God was going to rescue me. And so that was my image for a while of God, of I just need rescued from this. I just need rescued. And then when I started getting better, it became a partnership with God of like, let's do something with this. Like, I've just learned a lot, and I've grown closer to you from my dark night of the soul. And God was kind of a partner. I was like, I'm going to work for you. You're my employer. I'm your hands and feet on the earth. Let's go. And then now I'm kind of in this imagery of God where it's like that proud grandparent who thinks you can do no wrong, and you can't wait to tell them all the great things happening in your life, and they just smile at you and love you no matter what. And that's kind of where I am now with God, of just like, Ginger, I am a source of love and guidance for you. You just keep going, keep me at the center of things. It's all going to be okay. And so I give you those silly imageries that I have just to invite you to think way out of the box. Think way out of the box of what is God to you. And I want to share this story with you. And I'm going to share my screen because there's an image. So I was in seminary, and let's see. Yeah, so I was in seminary sitting by two Korean, let me see if I can get this. Okay, I was in seminary sitting by two Korean students, and one of the students, this picture fell out of his Bible. And So one Korean friend was on one side and the other one was on the other side of me. And so this picture fell out of his Bible. And I looked at my friend and said, "Is that your Jesus?" And she said, "Yeah." And I was like, "That's not what my Jesus looked like." And so we got into this great sidebar conversation. I think we got in trouble from the professor because we were whispering. But I was so fascinated that this was the Jesus that my South Korean friends grew up with, right? And I realized then, oh, we all make Jesus look like us. We all imagine whatever we want to with Jesus. And so I give you, we're coming back to that in a minute. Okay, I give you that image because that was a revelation to me that my friends from Africa in seminary had an African looking Jesus. And I grew up in Kansas with I think, blonde, blue-eyed Jesus, fair-skinned, right? And now we know through historians and archaeologists and science that Jesus was for sure a Middle Eastern descent and would have been really dark skin and not at all like these images we've passed down. So I give you that example just to say, let go of what's not serving you. What God really wants is for us to connect. I believe that with every cell of my body. And so find imagery that allows you to make that connection. And so that's an important thing because you're going to read imagery of Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, and they use a ton of imagery in their writings. And so this is just an invitation to imagine it the way it helps you connect to God, whatever serves you. So I think the thing that what I find in all of these studies of imagery, because I got fascinated with that in seminary and studied a little bit of like, why do we make God and Jesus look like what we want them to make? And I really think the bottom line is it's safe and familiar. We go to the safe and familiar. And so something that looks like me feels safe and familiar. And so we're doing that. And I think that applies to our imagery of God. Make it safe and familiar to you. So I hope you'll experiment with that. Place things in the chat if things are coming to you as we talk here, because it might help somebody else to know what your imagery is. So in The Cloud of Unknowing, if you haven't read that yet, that excerpt was all about get rid of the labels, get rid of everything you've been taught and just experience God. And so circle back to that because that reading now may be more relevant after this conversation, but forget all the pictures you've seen and what you've been taught and just experience God on your own. Sometimes I'll do this standing out in the sun. I'll close my eyes and just let that sun on my face feel that. That can be God. That's when I talk to God often. It's just the sun reminds me of imagery of God. Nature everywhere, I think, could be that. The ocean horizon, if you're near the shore right now, the laugh of a baby, you know, a parent's hand holding your hand or a grandparent's hand, that warm blanket at the hospital. I love that one. So all of that is imagery. If it makes you feel peace and love, you got it. And one of my favorite lines from the musical Les Miserables is to love another person is to see the face of God. To love another person is to see the face of God. We've all loved another person. So you've already figured out what the imagery of God is, right? You've already got it. You know it. So just tap into that when you're going into your prayer and contemplative time. Okay, I'm going to put up our timeline again real quick. I'm going to introduce you to Teresa and John and then tell you a little bit about, what they're, oh dear. Okay, so here's the timeline. And again, I'm sorry, 2020 is cut off with our pictures, but the circle is where we are. So Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. We're in the 1500s now. So Augustine was in the 500s, right? The Bible was canonized. So the Bible is the book we have it today in 325. Jesus died around 30, 33. The mystics were the early 1000s, and now we're at 1500. And remember, 100 years is a long time. right? We forget when we see these timelines, we're talking about 2,000 years since the life of Jesus now, almost 2,000 years since Jesus was on the earth. And so keep this all in mind, because we're continuing to evolve as humans through this time. But that kind of lets you know where we are. So we are in, with John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, we're in a very tumultuous time. We have the Protestant Reformation brewing, which was people splitting off from the Catholic Church into different denominations. We also have the Spanish Inquisition happening, and that's important. A little dose of history today is important, because Teresa and John were both from Spain. They both lived in Spain. I'm going to start with Teresa of Avila. She was born in, I have flip charts all over my office, 1515. She was born in 1515 in Spain. And the Spanish Inquisition had started in the time of her father's childhood, okay? So her father grew up as a child in the Spanish Inquisition. And the deal with the Spanish Inquisition, that's important background, is it put an end to this utopia thing happening in Spain that was a time when Jews, Muslims, and Christians all lived together. And it was called La Convivencia. So I know I have some Google researchers out there. It's LA and then Covivincia. And I didn't learn about this until I was in seminary. And it's this beautiful concept of how three faiths can all live together. And so Spain had mastered this. Muslims, Jews, and Christians were all living together in the 1400s, and they were educating each other's children. They were sharing holy spaces. They were celebrating each other's holy days. It was looked at more like, I appreciate your ancestors and your history. Tell me about that. It wasn't looked at like a threat of who's right and wrong. So it was a very different time and a very good lesson on interfaith coexisting for all of us. So this was a time of peace in Spain. So Teresa's dad is growing up in that, right? Then the Spanish Inquisition starts. And the Spanish Inquisition is one of these yucky things in Christian history where Rome wanted more power, and they decided that Christianity needed to be the national religion everywhere in Europe, and kind of this takeover began. And so people were forced to claim Christianity as their faith, even if they were Jews and Muslims. And so the La Convivencia basically was eradicated. And so during this time, people that were Jewish, which Teresa of Avila's father's family was Jewish. So Teresa's father grew up Jewish in this utopia that then was ended and had to convert to Christianity. So he grew up as a child who's watching his parents pretend to be Christian to the public and then practice Judaism in their home. Well, if you got caught, it was the death penalty. And so they got caught and they confessed, and little Teresa's dad is watching all of this. They confessed, and the confession led to humiliation and mockery in the city square. You had to dress up in these Christian costumes with crosses all over them and parade around. You had to stop in every cathedral, chapel, and Christian statue and bow down and claim Christianity as your faith. Okay, so between you and I, this is as far from Jesus as we could get, right? So we are alarmed by this. The Roman Christians at the time thought this made total sense. So this little boy watches all of this, and he decides Christianity is disgusting, and I will have a life of prestige and wealth to make up for my father and mother's public humiliation. So that's Teresa's father. So she grows up with a father who denounces Christianity but is very wealthy, and she has no faith in her life. And so she tells it as when she was 12, her mother died, and she kind of went off the rails. She tells it as like, if there was a sin to be had, I sinned it. I did it. She was obsessed with boys. She rebelled in every way that you could in the 1500s. And so at 17, her desperate father, as a single father, placed her in a convent, in a Catholic convent, even though he's denouncing Christianity. He's that desperate to get his daughter out of trouble. So Teresa ends up liking it. Okay, so that's the background on Teresa, and that's important to know because she's wrestling with faith her whole life. And that's why I think it's important to kind of know why people have faith crisis. And it gives us all permission of like, no wonder I'm kind of messed up. This is what I grew up with, right? So give yourself that permission. So she ends up loving the convent, but the only options in the 1500s was to get married or to be a nun. That was your destiny as a woman. She watched her mother die in childbirth, and she did not want to ever have a family. That was so traumatic for her and so heartbreaking to watch her father raise children by himself that she declared, I never want to be a wife. I never want a family. So that her other option was I make this convent thing work for me, right? This is my only option. So she was not there on a spiritual journey. She was there because it was the least of the worst options in the 1500s. And she was ill a lot. She had times of paralysis and fevers. Many times she thought she was going to die. She, like Julian in Norwich, had her last rites read. She even has a story that she tells where she had wax that they placed over her eyes for burial, but she was still alive. They were just letting her lay there and die, but preparing her for burial. And so she had many, many near-death experiences where she experienced God in a new way. And so, but she hadn't had that kind of moment where she knew about her faith for sure. And she writes about that really honestly. So for 20 years, she was in and out of illness in the convent. She was a devoted nun. She was working at faith. I read it as she was doing the intellectual work, but she really struggled with, where is God in my heart? And you'll see in her writings, she came up with this concept of the interior castle, which is different dwellings. I think there are 6 dwellings in the progress towards God. So it's like this castle, and we go through different levels or different rooms to get there. 7th dwelling is where you finally find God in the center of your interior castle. And so her struggle is about, I know all this, but I don't feel God within me, which sounds like a lot of us, doesn't it? So when she's 40, she kind of has her moment with God in a vision where it all kind of clicks, and she feels like she finally really is living a life with God at the center. But the Spanish Inquisition is still happening. At this point, the Spanish Inquisition is all about power and taking over. And if anybody is talking about having a relationship with God outside the cathedral, they're a threat to the church for economic reasons, for political reasons. So the mystics were heretics at this point. You cannot connect with God in your bedroom at night before you go to bed. No, you got to come to the cathedral to find God. And so that was very much the atmosphere Teresa was living in as a woman having these experiences with God. So this is background to tell you why her writings are the way they are, because feminists don't like Teresa of Avila. Feminists say Teresa of Avila was too hard on women, was too critical, kind of all this stuff. So the first stuff I read about her kind of put her on this shelf of not a mystic to read. However, I found a scholar who is one of the more reputable ones who said, no, people, she was playing the game. Don't you see? She grew up with a father who pretended to be Christian, but was really Jewish. She knew how to placate the political powers by saying, I'm just a lowly woman. I find God among pots and pans. That's one of her favorite lines, or her famous lines. I know nothing. I'm just a lowly woman trying to find God. She writes of all of this. Well, this author that you're going to read, Maribel Starr, she's one of the leading Teresa of Avila researchers. She said she's savvy. right? She was figuring out how to avoid being arrested, and continue the work for God in her vision of where the church needed to go. So I love that. So if you have studied Teresa of Avila before and you've kind of gotten this like yucky feeling about her, that was more patriarchy driven. The authors I have found on her really think that she was just playing small to not get arrested and be able to continue her ministry, which, how brilliant is that? But this is where we enter John of the Cross now into her life. So she manages to avoid the Spanish Inquisition. Her writings do get destroyed a couple times, so she would rewrite them. We have her writings, but the church tried to get rid of them at different times. But in her 50s, she's done playing the game. She starts to rock the boat. And Teresa of Avila comes into her own. She knows herself now, and she's going to take on the church because in her eyes, we've gone way away from Jesus. And this is where John of the Cross comes in. John of the Cross was 25 years old. Teresa's 52. John is headed to the mountains to become a hermit because he's an ordained priest that's done with the church too. And they find each other. And this is like a divine intersection in Spain. And they start talking about how they see the direction of the church and how they want to return to contemplative practices and what Jesus taught and compassion and caring for the poor and how they don't see any of that happening in the European church. So they create a vision together. And a little background on John quickly, because I know you're probably not as into this as I am. John grew up very, very poor. And so that's important to know because John has a heart for the poor and really wants to return to Jesus's care for the poor in the future of the church. And John was, his father died when he was 2. His mother was widowed. His mother was a very poor weaver at the time. So she wove fabric. She had married a very wealthy textile owner, but the textile owner's family disowned him because he married a lower class. And so they were very, very poor. So John grew up hearing stories of how the wealthy disowned the poor, and that shaped his faith and world perspective. So one of his brothers dies from malnutrition, starvation, because they were so poor. And his single mother gets desperate and puts John in an orphanage as if she had died. And the orphanage is run by, get this, Augustinian nuns, who you read Augustine last week, and Augustine would have lived 1,000 years before this is happening. But how ironic that John of the Cross, who will become one of the great mystic writers in the same class as Augustine, is now a child in an orphanage named after Augustine, and they're teaching Augustine's teaching. So, I mean, I have to think there's some divine stuff at work here in the way these paths all crossed. So John grows up basically as an orphan, even though he still has one living parent, but he has these gifts of intellect and love, and he quickly gets named as an acolyte in the orphanage and the masses, and then he becomes kind of a chaplain to the sick and dying. He finds this gift of being able to sit with people in death, and so he goes on to be ordained as a priest, and has a career as a priest in Spain, in the city. Then he's getting disgruntled with the way that the church is headed. And so he's on his way to the mountains to just check out and lead a contemplative life. And they both write all of this. So the story I'm telling you is paraphrased, so you don't have to go through the heavy, heavy paragraphs of writing. And they find each other and they say, let's do it differently. So they start building monasteries and convents. They build 15 together. They raise money. Their mission is going to we are going to take care of the poor in Spain. We are going to bring back contemplative practices. We are going to tell people they can connect with God wherever they are. They do prison ministry. They're like the real deal, hands and feet in Spain, trying to go back to the original Christianity. So of course they face persecution and all kinds of political hoops they have to jump through. And John gets imprisoned, actually. He gets arrested for going against the church, and he's in prison for 9 months. And that's where he reads what you're going to read, which is Dark Night of the Soul. And so it's really not so much as a poem of despair. It's more him telling us of how he connected to God in despair. And so I think you'll find that it's not as heavy as like the Lamentation scripture you're going to read, but it's because John is writing to give you hope. And then I'm going to give you a little kind of excerpt. So John wrote this poetry. He was a poet. But then he later goes back and writes commentary on it, and it is super dense. In fact, like, this is one of the books. You can see how thick this is, and it is so dense. And this is just his commentary on his poetry, like saying what I meant. So I'm just giving you a couple pages out of that to get the feel of it. And if you're really interested, I can give you more resources on that if you want to go deeper. So there's all kinds of speculation of like, were Teresa and John romantic partners? They write about the bridegroom and being married to God. They even write with sensual language with God. And so it's kind of like the Song of Songs, that book in the Bible that we're all like, what is this? Is this a love letter? Is this two people? Is this between somebody and God? And so it's in that genre of bridegroom terminology that sometimes it's weird to make kind of sense in 2020 of like marrying God, but they write with that kind of language, and they write about this like intimate connection with God. They really see themselves as married to God. So the scholars think they both were living very dedicated lives to God, not romantic partners at all. But you'll see some of that if you study them a little bit deeper. So Teresa actually makes fun of John. Was only 4 feet 11 inches tall. And she lovingly refers to him as half a friar. So instead of a full friar, he was half a friar. And so there's all kinds of like banter between them. They definitely had a mentor kind of relationship, but they really did create a new trajectory for Christianity during the Protestant formation. John Wesley, John Calvin, Martin Luther, they all kind of reflect on the writings of John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila. So our stuff in like the Methodist Book of Prayer and Presbyterian books of prayer, it really is infused with their influence. So where does all of this get us in a global pandemic? All right, so I think that why this is important to us right now is, one, to know that we are not alone. For thousands of years, this has been the human experience, and we are in our version of the human experience now. John and Teresa both write of plagues decimating the towns, and they both write of what are we going to do to take care of the poor because the drought has just obliterated the economic structure, and they are in it just like we are. And so that's why I think this stuff is just so timely. But one of the things that John invites us to do that I hope you'll just spend some time with yourself on is really look at what is beneath the layers of fear, of your fear and worry. So one of the exercises that I usually do with people, but I'm going to invite you to do this on your own, is kind of get a piece of paper and write down, what am I afraid of? And then go a layer beneath that. What am I really afraid of? And even go a layer beneath that. What am I really afraid of? And when you go down, it usually is that our deepest fears are around death, not being loved, and being alone. That usually our frustrations, our inconveniences, our anger, if you go down layer after layer after layer, and there's other things foundationally, but it's in that genre of what am I really, my deepest fear. So it may show up like this up here on superficially, like I'm afraid of running out of money. No, I'm really afraid of dying, right? You kind of boil down. So that I want you to do that work because again, when you can name what's really going on, it diffuses the power. And John, it's thick in his writings, but I've given you an excerpt that gets at that a little bit. Like, what is it in your soul? Go that deep. So the Christian mystics were very good at sitting in the gunk, right? They were very good at naming the feeling and sitting in it. And oftentimes they were either locked away or too sick to go anywhere. And so it's very similar to kind of how we are forced to sit in this stuff right now. And so, as we said earlier, you can go one direction or the other, and we're going to go toward God and let this deepen. So you have a worksheet this week, and I'm almost finished. You have a worksheet this week that helps you go through a little bit of an experiment and sit with God in what you're really afraid of. And the way that the worksheet works is that in both Mark and Luke, we have this story, and the scriptures are on your worksheet, where Jesus is going to heal Bartimaeus, a blind man. And before he heals him, in both stories, Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you? What do you want me to do for you?" And I imagine it as like, what can I do for you? How can I help you? That's the sincere question is, I'm here, Bartimaeus. What can I do for you? And I want you to put yourselves in that position with God right beside you. Ginger, what can I do for you? Michelle, what can I do for you? And it may sound strange at first, so you'll see some prompts of what God might say. But first of all, I want you to really name what you're so scared about and what you need his help with. And then see if you feel a response. So oftentimes responses sound like or feel like these words. Jesus would say to you, I can see you. I can hear you. I understand how you feel. I know this about you, Ginger. Right? And remind you of something about yourself. I'm glad to be with you. I will help you. And then the sentences finish. But I put those prompts on there to just help your imagination, help your experience with God to think about what would Jesus say back to you? How would Jesus help you? What do you want Jesus to help you do? And I love that scripture because it's such a human interaction with Jesus of, I'm here, what do you want me to do for you? And it's almost like Jesus makes Bartimaeus name it, right? And Bartimaeus says, restore my sight. Okay, I'll do that for you. And so I feel like that scripture teaches us in kind of an allegorical way to name what we need, and then allow Jesus to say, I get you. I know you better than you know yourself. And I am right here beside you. And you do not fear. Do not be afraid. We're going to figure this out together. And for you to really feel that presence. So that's one of your activities for this week. And just really let yourself, go back to that imagery we talked about and let yourself really explore this new space of feeling really, really safe and held by God. So what can you do in these moments, just like quick fixes? I try to give you in every class some just quick things to do. One of my favorites is to put your hand on your heart and say to yourself, in this moment, I'm fine. In this moment, I'm okay. Right here, right now at 10:50 a.m. on this call with hundreds of women, all of you, I'm okay right now. I'm okay right now. Right here, right now, we're okay. And those moments start to link together, and we make it through the hour, and we make it through the day, and we make it through the week. But literally going back into that present moment, right here, right now, I'm okay, lets your brain quit running down the paths of all the what ifs. And we just take it moment by moment. That is such an important practice. So please add that into your repertoire. And then another practice is, some people call this grounding. There's different names for it. I just remember it as name 5 things I see right now. Name 5 things I see right now. And that brings you into the present moment. So a marker, my cup, the water I spilled earlier, my phone, the laptop, the papers, 5 things. I'm right here, right now, in this place. And that just is a brain trick because your brain is miles ahead, years ahead, months ahead. What if, what if, what if, what if? And we're just going to bring it back to brain. We are right here, right now, in this moment. And what it does is it interrupts the worry loop enough that then you can get a hold of it again, right? It's just an interruption tool. It's not that it's going to change your life. It's just going to interrupt your racing brain. And notice your breathing, notice your heartbeat, be right here, right now. And that is really one of the only things we can do when we are in that deep overwhelm, grief, and worry. Another practice, and I'll post this, this was in one of my weekly emails quite a while ago, last year, I think, but this idea of, I use barn doors or sliding doors or swimming, but you're pushing back your thoughts. Like, okay, this is all the past and this is all the future. And I am just going to push that out of my brain right now. And then you create this space of just right here, right now, I'm not worried. Right here, right now, I'm not worried. But the imagery of pushing those thoughts away, it really helps people get some control over, I can be present right here. And I've got one more to share with you. And this is more of a physical embodiment kind of thing to do. But this is, let's see, let me advance. There you go. This is called a surrender pose. There's two poses. So your screen may be cutting off this beautiful woman on the ground, but she's just laying in what is called corpse pose, which is a little bit morbid in yoga, but it's just a flat, hands up, feet, let them fall out to the side, just completely no resistance, laying on the floor flat. The other one is called child's pose. I also think it's so interesting that this is how you pray in Islam, oftentimes, this position. But this is a pure surrender. And in one of my classes, when the sanctuary first opened, we went down under that stained glass window and we all did this on the stage, on the altar. And we all just surrendered under that beautiful stained glass window where Jesus is opening his hands to us. And that is a powerful practice. And so because I can't do it physically with you, I really want you to, as silly as it might feel, get on the floor today and do one of these and really let your body surrender, and then your mind will surrender. So think about what does surrender look like or feel like to me, and embody that. Again, we're moving from our brains into our hearts and into our bodies. And those poses help you do that. I'm going to end with a practice called Tonglen. And you'll find instructions on this. But we are going to do a version together as our closing prayer. And Tonglen is a Tibetan practice of compassion. And so it's really a practice of connecting with the suffering of others and our own suffering to then release that suffering. And so to me, this is one of the ultimate compassion practices. And we're going to do a simplified version today since we are on Zoom. And it's a hard one to do as a group, but I invite you to kind of do this to the best of your abilities this week. The full enlightened practice is that you imagine taking on the pain and suffering of somebody else, and you bring it into your body, out of their body, and then you release it out of your body and you send them a healing breath. I will say that is a lot to ask for people that are also in grief, right? So we are all also in grief, and it is very hard right now to take on somebody else's stuff. So I'm not going to have us do the full practice because it's not fair to our fragile hearts and souls and minds right now to take on the grief of the world. So what we're going to do is I want you to hold it out in front of you, right? So almost like if you could be a vacuum sucking up the gunk of the world right now, everyone's fear and worry and pain, and you just hold that in front of you in this space. And I kind of see it as a muddy mess, like this big, gray, muddy mess of how we all feel right now. And then we're going to imagine this beautiful white, yellow cloud enveloping that mess and carrying it away. And then we're going to breathe out what the world needs, which is love and joy and compassion. And we're going to share that in peace. We're going to share that with our out breath. So I'm going to have us all close our eyes and guide us through this. But before I do that, I would love it in the chat if you could put things that you think the world is feeling, right? So what are the first line responders feeling? What are teachers feeling? What are the scientists looking for a vaccine feeling? What are people without relatives right now feeling? What are people isolated in nursing homes feeling? Like, just imagine what people are feeling, and if you will, put it in the comments. And I'm going to work with some of these as we go through this and give you an example of what this practice is like. So take a second to do that. Okay. Okay, awesome. Good job, everybody. Okay. All right, now I invite you to take a deep breath and close your eyes. And remember, there's no right or wrong way to do this. Just listen and let me guide you through it. Don't feel like you have to do anything. Just play with the imagery and you can practice more on your own. So get comfortable in your chair. Maybe put both feet on the floor so you feel stable. Take another deep breath. And then I want you to imagine that you have the ability to bring out of every person these things that they're feeling, and you can just hold them outside of their body. You're just going to take this from them so they don't have to carry it anymore. You're going to take their sense of grief and loss, take away their fear, take away their deep fatigue. They're so tired. Take away their loneliness. We're just going to suck this into a vacuum that's just right in front of you. Take away abandonment and anger. Take away for them their sense of helplessness and so confused. Take that away from them so they can release that. Take away their fear of vulnerability, their deep sorrow. Pull out their anxiety. Pull out their sense of responsibility. They don't have to solve all the problems. We're going to take that out of them. Take out that feeling of being so alone, so disappointed, overwhelmed. Remove their fear of uncertainty. Remove that feeling of being disconnected. They're so fearful of the unknown. We're just going to take that out of them right now. Release them of that. We're going to take away all the blame, all the sorrow. We take away all the stress trying to look for the cure and the vaccine, all the pressure to find the answer. We're going to take all of that out of this, out of them, all of those people. We're taking all of that stuff out and we're just holding it like this vacuum in front of us. We just sucked it all up. They are all free of that burden right now. And we're just going to hold it for them. We got it. You don't have to carry that anymore. And then I want you to turn the vacuum on yourself and get all of that same stuff out of your body. Put it all into that vacuum. Just imagine that it's just being sucked away. And you are light and empty of worry. And it's all contained. It's out of your body and it's out of everyone else's body. And then we're just going to imagine that this beautiful yellow, white cloud, this beautiful sense of peace just envelops that vacuum and carries it away. It's gone. Just blew out of sight. And now take a deep breath in and feel what it feels like to feel light and unburdened. And fill yourself up with compassion and love. And then on your out breath, share that with all of those people that you just rescued. You just pulled all of the gunk out. Now fill them up with compassion and peace and love and assurance, deep sense of peace. And maybe you see them physically straighten up or smile. They are so relieved at the work that you just did for them. They feel a sense of relief. They feel this wave of calm coming over them. And then notice that in your own body, you just showed the world compassion in a whole new way. And you showed yourself that same compassion, that we can let this go. We can let it drift away. We don't have to carry it. Just feel the lightness of the world. You helped contribute to that. And now God goes to work in that space. They feel less burdened and they can feel the presence of God so much more clearly now. And so can you. And then take a deep breath. Kind of return to the space that you're in, the room that we're in. And you can open your eyes and come back in. That's a beautiful act of compassion. And you can do that anytime for yourself and for other people. So those people you feel so far away from, this is something you can do for them. When you feel hopeless, this is something you can do, and it's powerful. So I will have a handout on that with some additional prompts. If that was hard for you, don't worry about it. Let the rest of us do it for you. And just experiment. Just open your heart and mind to the possibility that you can contribute in that way. And let us be that our prayer for all of those who need courage, let them find courage. For all of those that need assurance, let them find assurance. For all of those that don't have a voice, let them feel peace. All of these beautiful things you can pray for people to have, and I believe they will have it.